Good morning, my fellow professional colleagues. In the next 1 hour to 30 minutes, I will be speaking with you on this topic, a holistic approach to risk management. Osas has already introduced me. I don't think I should reinvent the wheel by repeating what she has already said. Okay. All right. So what are we going to be looking at? We'll be looking at what risk and risk management mean to various members and the organizations that are represented in this webinar. We'll also be asking questions and also answering on how we have been dealing with the complexities and the risks created in our current environment in Nigeria. Okay? So we all understand that risk management is a performance enabler. That means that risk management helps the board, the executive leadership, the senior management, the operational staff, and also the regulators to be at best in delivering their roles and responsibilities to the organizations. So some of the questions we'll be asking and answering to check how well we have been driving the risk management efforts in our various organizations. How are we finding the risks and measuring the sizes and also ranking them in order of importance? How are we also communicating the risks to the right levels? The executive management, the board, and also the board committees. And of course, for the public companies, how are we relating with the information about risks to the shareholders and also to the regulators when they require us to disclose information regarding the risks in our business? How about assurance comfort? How much of this are we required? And how much are we receiving? The executive leadership, the board, and the board committees, they rely on the various business areas in our organizations to provide them with information about the performance of the business and how the various levels are ensuring that the risk management efforts, practices, and activities are aligning with the corporate goals and objectives. And again, how do we compare our ERM efforts with the targets established by the company, the targets established by the regulators, and also best practices? So these are the areas we'll be looking at. All right. So my first question is, okay, I have to make some assumptions that as members of Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria, we assume that we all have reasonable understanding of the following. One is the principles of corporate governance from international and local perspectives. International, I mean OECD principles, which is general. The Basel principles of corporate governance, which is for the banks, and so many others from the international level. at our local level, which is Nigeria, the National Code of Corporate Governance, okay? And also the secretarial codes. We know that the National Code have aligned all the secretarial codes, the different secretarial codes we have in Nigeria. But we also know that Financial Reporting Council has also made it bestowed the responsibility of implementing the national codes by the various regulators in the sector. For example, this SEC, okay, and the CBN for the banks, and SEC for the public companies, NCC for the telecoms, PENCOM for the pension fund industry. And we also recognize that the National Code also requires that, or Financial Reporting Council, that wherever there is, if you compare the National Code and also the Secretarial Code in some certain areas, and they address the same thing, but if the Secretarial Code has stronger mandate, of course, we have to apply that section in the Secretarial Code. Okay, so we'll also assume that everyone here understand the roles and responsibilities of the board committees, and the executive leadership in building and sustaining good corporate governance framework in our organizations. Again, I also assume that we all have some knowledge and experience and skills on enterprise risk management practices. All right. So I will just revalidate the specific responsibilities that some of the local codes have bestowed on the executive leadership, the board of directors, and also other levels in our organizations. What I have here is the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020, which is the latest. Sections 405, 404, and 405 have detailed specific responsibilities to the audit committees and also the officers whose responsibilities are to sign the financial statement, which basically are the CEO of the public list of the public companies, the CFO, and other officers performing similar roles in the public companies. Now, I will just read only few. Subsection 7 of Section 404 of the CAMA states that the audit committee functions include keeping under review the effectiveness of the company's system of accounting control. And Section 405, which has to do with corporate responsibility for financial reports, mandates that the responsibilities for signing the financial reports is that of the CEO and CFO, and persons performing similar functions. And their responsibilities regarding internal controls include establishing and maintaining effective internal controls, both in design and operation. They should also be responsible for evaluating the effectiveness of the internal controls they have established, which is self-assessment in this case. And moreover, they should certify that the company's internal controls are effective as at the date of the evaluation. This is from CAMA perspective. This requirement is mandatory for audit committees and also the CEOs, the CFOs. Okay? Now,
the overview of
the Investment and Securities Act 2007 shares the same perspectives with CAMA on maintaining effective internal controls and also certifying the effectiveness. All right. So the specific sections within the Investment and Securities Act are sections 60, 61, 62, 63, 60 to 63. They share the same perspectives as mandated by CAMA, which means that the audit committees, the CFO, and the CEO, they have key roles to ensure that the enterprise risk management practices in the organizations are effective, because controls are actually to address risks. So if there are no risks, there won't be any control. Okay. Now, the National Code of Corporate Governance 2018 has some specific principles that mandates the establishment, the maintenance of effective risk management through internal control. That is principle 1, which states the role of the board, section 1.9 or clause 1.9. The role of the board includes establishing the company's risk management framework and monitoring its effectiveness, setting the company's risk appetite, receiving and reviewing risk reports. Okay? While of course, we know that the board delegates responsibilities to the various arms of board committees to ensure that the board performs its roles and responsibilities effectively. Okay? So the committee responsible for risk management is responsible for reviewing and recommending for approval of the board the risk management policies and framework, as well as assist the board in its oversight of risk management strategy. That's one of the key roles. Then when it comes to risk assurance, because where risks have been identified and mitigating actions has been established, there is need to ensure that the policies and procedures, the processes, the control activities that have been established to conduct risk management in the organizations are working as expected. and also that innovations and creativity are also brought in to ensure continued improvement. And that is the whole essence of assurance. So in the areas of assurance, internal audit plays critical role. Risk management function plays critical role. Internal control function plays critical role. The compliance function plays critical role. And also the first line of defense, which is management, the various reviews conducted by the various interdepartmental functions and also the executive committees. They play critical role in providing assurance to ensure that the risk management functions, to ensure that they are in line with the expectations of the business and comply with the laws and regulations operating in our environment. So these are the mandates, some of the key mandates that the board, the executive leadership, and also the senior management and the lower levels should perform in any organization, particularly the public companies, okay? Of course, the medium and even small scale companies, they should also follow suit. All right. So what do risk and risk management mean? And what drives, or what should drive our risk management efforts? There are some basic facts that we all know. One is that every business, whether it's one man, partnership, limited liability, public company, or even government, public sectors and NGOs, they have primary purposes for which that business is started. And whoever is involved in starting the business also ensures that there are strategies in place to make sure that the business achieves those goals and objectives. In these goals and objectives, strategies can be found in various documents in the organization. Some are clearly documented, some are not clearly documented, some are not even documented, but the most important thing is that every business, no matter the level, the type, has objectives and the means of achieving those objectives. And that in achieving those objectives, there are factors that may enhance the achievement of those objectives or limit the achievement of those objectives, and that is risk. So let's look at a survey that was conducted by US Bureau of Labor and Statistics regarding driving the reason why risk management is very essential in every organization. This survey revealed that 20% of startup companies fail within the first 2 years. While 45% of these companies fail within the 5th year. 65% fail within the 10th year. Now, what it means is that it's only very small that survive beyond 10 years, okay? And what is the cause? The survey revealed that the primary root cause is the quality of risk management decisions and actions undertaken by those charged with the critical functions in the organization. Now, what is the implication of this? Well, the implication is that any one big mistake made in decision making or in action implementation can have huge impact, negative impact on the success and survival of that organization. The same thing applies to taking the right decisions and also the right actions and ensuring that they're implemented well. So the questions to you is, what is the situation in your own environment? Our environment is Nigeria. I want to believe that most of our members are in Nigeria. We know the situation now. Okay? So, based on what we have seen from the previous slides, risk is not just about negative things. Risk is about positive and negative. But it appears that most of the time, when we are talking about risks, we are only focused on the negative things, which is the threats. No. There are opportunities, and those opportunities, any opportunity brings about good things. We also know that generally, the most common risk responses, which is actions that are adopted in addressing risks, both particularly the negative risk, are reject. That means we are saying that this risk, this business area, or that action I want to take, I'm no longer taking it because the risk in it, I won't be able to control it or contain it. The impact will be too much. Therefore, I need to avoid taking part in that, either starting business or taking action. But the most critical one is the risks we have accepted to manage, which means that when we look at the type of risk, the root causes of the risk, the likelihood of that risk occurring, the impact or consequences, the ownership of the risk, and also comparing it with these factors with the risk attitude and appetite of the company, the board approves that the business management led by the CEO should establish controls to manage or to mitigate those risks. Okay? So, based on our understanding of what risk is negative and positive events that can enhance or prevent the achievement of our corporate goals and objectives and strategies and so forth. Okay? Risk management itself is a process for doing what? To identify its risks, analyze the risks, and identify the critical risks or the big issues that keep the board committee members, the executive leadership awake at night. And of course, to establish control actions to manage those risks. Now, explaining what risk management is further, we can look at COSO framework. COSO is an organization that originates from US. Their primary responsibility is to establish internal controls to support organizations fight fraud risk. But As time went by, COSO expanded its mandates to cover other risk types in the organization, which includes strategic risk, compliance risk, enterprise risk management, and operational risk. So defining risk management as a process, the box we have seen here in the COSO framework, all the activities, starting from internal control environment, objective setting, event identification, risk assessment, risk response, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. All these activities make up what risk management is all about. Okay, which means that our internal audit is also part of risk management activities in the organization. Risk management as a function is also part of risk management. Our health and safety is also part of risk management. That's if we look at COSO perspective. Now, what are the current realities in our environment? Everybody in Nigeria now knows that there are plethora of complexities, challenges to businesses, and even beyond the business sector. And some of these challenges are resource quality and availability in terms of skills. A large number of our skilled labor, particularly in the medical and technology sector, a large number of them have relocated to other countries, Canada, US, UK, Australia, where they felt that they can get better paid. In spite of all these pressures, complexities, forcing large number of businesses to close down, large number of businesses to struggle, the equity investors still expect high return on their investment. Okay? So this is also another call, apart from the regulatory mandates for effective risk management practices to be maintained in the organizations. The equity shareholders or equity investors are also demanding that the CEO, the CEOs and team, the board and team should ensure that the companies are managed and governed to, okay? So it is only risk management, making sure that effective, good risk management principles are adopted, implemented, and enforced that can help organizations to meet the shareholders' demand, as well as the corporate objectives. So what I am COSO perspective, okay? We know that there are many other perspectives, like the Basel, okay? But COSO, it applies to every industry, while Basel applies to banks. All right. So having good understanding of the various risks in our business, which includes strategic risks, financial risks, legal and regulatory compliance risks, operational risks, is very, very important. And how do we manage this risk? Leading practices requires that this risk should not be managed in isolation, which means they are interrelated. Operational risk is interrelated with strategic risk, with financial risk, and legal and compliance risk. No risk should be managed in isolation, and we will know the reason why when we progress. We also know that the different stakeholders in our business environments have different levels of dependencies to get information about the business, how the business is performing, and how the business is managing the complexities and risks in the business, okay? The equity investors depend on the board of directors for information to provide them with reliable, with credible information. Credibility now means complete, accurate, valid, timely information about the business, and that the information provided are the big critical areas that they need to know in order to help them to take strategic decisions and actions concerning the business to move the business forward. We also know that the board of directors depend on the CEO, and the CEO depends on the executive directors for information. The executive directors depend on the senior management, while the senior management depends on the operational staff. Now, we have seen that, look, every level in the organization need to make sure that the information being provided to the next level is credible. And that credibility means that we must pay attention to our thoughts, to our activities, to the decisions we take and the actions we take. So, what does the leading practices expect from business managers and the governance teams? And also these equity stakeholders and regulators with respect to managing the complexities and the risks in our environment. One of the mandatory requirements is understanding the business of the companies we work for, the core business, the supporting functions. We need to demonstrate good understanding of the core business. We also need to demonstrate good understanding of the risks that will prevent or enhance the achievement of the goals and objectives of these businesses, okay? While we are demonstrating good understanding of the business and also reasonable understanding of the risks, we must make sure that we balance the cost of managing the risks with the anticipated benefits. These are mandatory for the business managers led by the CEO and the governance team led by the board chairman, okay? So my key question to the senior managers represented here, senior managers and below represented here, the executive directors and CEO represented here, and the board members are excluded from this question I will ask. So this question is, the senior managers and below levels that are represented here, how well are you and your organization performing in dealing with the complexities and risks in our environment. There are 4 key assessment criteria I expect you to use. One is the business impact of the risk management outcomes, the strategic positioning of the risk management function, stakeholders communication and relationship that the risk management function upholds, and visioning. How well is the organization performing? I know that's quite a lot. Of course, we believe that they are performing well. That's from level 3, which is good, very good, and excellent. But if our response is good and above, the board and the executives, do they agree with us? Based on the work we have done, both in Nigeria and overseas, and even the global surveys that have been conducted by various companies, the executive leadership, which is the CEO and team, and the governance team, most believe that their risk management practices is not up to level 3. Most organizations are performing between the high end of level 2, which is fair, and the lower end of level 3, which is good. Okay? So the question is, what type of risk management environment would you want to see in your business? The business leaders we have interacted with in the past through various engagements we have delivered and also surveys, the expectation is that your organization should be performing at least towards the end of level 4, which is very good. They don't want good. They want at least very, very good. Okay? So that means that within the targeting to be excellent or world class within the next 4 years. So what are the key things they have mentioned as the things that if they're seeing in the organization has been performed by the risk management functions from line of defense, first line of defense, second line of defense, and third line of defense? One of the key things they mentioned is focus on critical risks and issues that matter to the organization. Another critical element, they mentioned that they want to see being demonstrated is the risk management functions from the first line, the second line, and the third line to demonstrate matching talent to the value proposition, which means competent staff, not just competent, but also availability. All right? And also use of technology, savviness in use of technology to drive risk management practices in the business. And again, innovation and creativity being embedded, which means that everyone in the organization needs to be research-oriented and also to demonstrate skeptical mindset, which means that when things happen or things are about to happen, emerging issues, you don't need to wait for it to happen before you start talking about it in the organizations and also taking actions on what to do. All right? So we know that for organizations to get to level 4, as expected by the executive management and also the board, there are challenges. And those challenges include absence of risk and control taxonomy, which is risk library. Most organizations, what you see is internal audits. When they are doing their work and rating risks and control effectiveness, they use different skills. The same thing applies to operational risk management function. The same thing applies to internal control. The same thing applies to the different areas of the business, which means that there is no common usage of risk rating parameters. How about definition of risk and risk management and also control? A large number of professionals within the risk management and control functions misunderstand controls, absence of controls to be risk, but this is not the case. So risk taxonomy ensures that there is common understanding of the various elements that describe risks in an organization. Another key area is lack of harmonization of reports that are coming from the different assurance functions. Internal control, they have their own reports on the control effectiveness. They are monitoring. And the issues they have identified at the rating and the rest of them may be quite different from what the regulatory compliance are reporting, and may be quite different from what internal audit is also reporting. So the question is, the board, the executive leadership, they rely on internal control, risk management, compliance, and internal audit to provide them a single source of the truth about the risks in their business, about the control effectiveness in their business. But internal audit is saying a different thing. Internal control is reporting a different thing. Risk management is reporting a different thing. Regulatory compliance is reporting a different thing. We know that regulatory compliance, the focus is on the legal and regulatory issues pertaining to the business. But internal audits, when they are doing their work, they don't ignore regulatory compliance issues. The same thing applies to internal control. But when they are reporting, you find out that they have divergent opinions. So whose truth will the board and the executive leadership rely on? Is it that of the internal control or internal audit or risk management or compliance? So this lack of harmonization is bringing lots of issues, complexities in understanding, and also delay in taking decisions. So what it means is that the users of these reports, the board committees, and the executive leadership are left on their own to use their own initiative to take their own decision. This is not a good sign of good principles of risk management. Okay, and so many other issues. Okay, right. So, give example. Let's look at one of the examples. One is, what levels in your organization does risk management happen? We have 3 different levels that risk management should happen in any organization. One is strategic level, the board and executive. The other one is a macro level, the various business units, entities. Then the micro level, which is the various business processes and business unit level. But we have issue. The most difficult areas we have problem with respect to risk management is not at the strategic level, it's at the macro and micro level. That is where we have the greatest challenge. And the reason is as a result of knowledge gap on what truly risk is. Knowledge of the business. What risk means. Being able to distinguish between control activities and tasks. Being able to own our risks and controls. That's the greatest problem at the macro and micro level. And because of this, the type of report, the quality of report and recommendations, report on issues, advice and recommendations we provide to the strategic level, which is the executive and also board, tend to be watered down. All right. How about assurance? What level of assurance is required by the board and executive, and what level are we providing? From the first line to the third line of defense. This is a very big challenge. The quality of assurance we provide to the CEO and the executive team, to the board and board committees. If we go back to the previous slide, which indicates that the biggest problem, we can see it being at play here. The first line, they are the ones that are supposed to own their risks, the control owners, the process owners, the business process owners, the risk owners. They are supposed to own their risks, their process and controls. But what do we see? What we see is instances where the operational level staff, they believe that it is the job of the second line of defense, which is internal control, the financial control, the compliance, the operational risk, that it is their responsibility to make sure that controls are working. Their own is just to carry out the work. Initiate transactions, complete the transaction, make sure that approvals is given. It is the internal control, the second level, that have the major responsibility to make sure that controls are working effectively. They don't have that responsibility. At the same time, they also expect that the top line of defense, which is internal audit, they have the same responsibility. So when it comes to allocation of responsibilities, on risk management and controls in organization, we are talking about less than 5% at the core business level. It's about 95% at the second line, which is internal control, financial control, compliance, risk, and the rest of them. And 50% at the internal audit level, which is the third line of defense. Now, by this allocation, what it means is that internal control, internal auditors, the risk coordinators, the financial control officers, the operational risk, the assurance functions that play as second line, they are overburdened with ensuring that risks and controls in the organizations are working well. Okay? So, but should this allocation be so? The expectation, what is expected by the board and the executives, is that the first line operational staff, the core business lines, it is their responsibility to provide at least 95% assurance on the risks and controls they own. That is the expectation. This is not a hypothetical model. This model was actually derived from the various board directors, executive management teams, regulators, external auditors, external consultants of various companies we have worked for, the interviews we held with them when we were conducting risk assessment or designing internal controls or evaluating the effectiveness of their corporate governance, risk management, internal control, compliance, and internal audit functions. This is what the executive leadership and also board, what they expect. Now, which means that internal control, financial control, compliance, they should only be burdened with about 2.5% of the assurance work. We know that no system is foolproof. So since the expectation is very high on the first line, the operational staff, now it's not impossible that about 5% of this, they're saying, okay, look, provide at least 95%. We know that no system is foolproof. Therefore, we can allow 5% failures or 5% of the risks to drop from your basket. Those 5%, the second line, which is the internal control and team, should be able to provide 2.5% assurance on those 5% of the risks you could not provide assurance on because they escaped you. Why internal audit should focus on 1.5%. I know that some of us will be asking, how come? Why should internal audit be doing 1.5%? And why should internal control be doing 2.5%? Why would the first line be doing 95%? Look, internal audits, by their mandate, is expected to focus on the critical risks in the business. And if they are to focus on the critical risks in the business, that means that if an organization has up to 100 risks, internal audit, but providing assurance on those 5, while the rest of the remaining should be taken care of. The second line, which is internal control, should provide 2.5% assurance. The rest should be done by the first line. But we know that a lot of companies will still struggle even to provide up to 30% at the first line. Okay? So there are current limitations. One of the greatest limitations, apart from knowledge gap, is silo mentality, silo behaviors, and silo practices among the 3 lines of defense, particularly the second and third line. Internal audits, internal control, risk management, operational risk, even quality management, they are always struggling for boundaries. You find that the same level of the same area of assurance, the same effort that internal control is spending on monitoring particular risks is the same effort that internal audit is expending, is the same effort compliance is expending. No single source of truth. In many audit committees, I have attended audit committee meetings to make presentations. The major problem, their major concerns is multiplicity of reports across the different assurance providers and lack of harmonization, redundancies, duplications, and what they expect is harmonization. Okay? Now, this harmonization, a lot of companies, as part of risk management, are using different methods to do that, particularly in Nigeria. Some are consolidating reports, maybe, which means internal audit will perform their audit, internal control will perform their monitoring, compliance will perform their monitoring, risk will perform their monitoring, and the rest of them. They will now get their final reports and start comparing. The major problem with doing that is that the big issues, right from planning, are missed out. You are only depending on the report somebody has produced without giving attention to the planning activities and to the work execution. The best practices solution, which is part of enterprise risk management, to address multiplicity and complexities created by the various produced by the various line of defense in the organization, particularly line 2 and line 3. The best practices solution is combined assurance. It's saying is that internal audit, internal control, risk management, compliance, quality management, IT, financial control, every aspect of the risk coordinators and assurance in the first line and second line, and even the first line, we should all start our journey, the journey of the work we are doing, the journey of our planning, the journey of our execution, the completion and reporting, using one single risk register, enterprise risk register. That is what combined assurance is saying. And beyond using one risk register, in planning, we should all come together and discuss roles and responsibilities towards some certain risks in the business, whose primary function is to provide the assurance, so that others in the business, other assurance providers, result of other departments in the business, instead of each particular function starting afresh to start planning for the same thing, spending the same amount of time and effort, and coming up with reports that do not say the truth about the key risks and controls in the business. Okay? But we know that in Nigeria, combined assurance is an emerging subject, unlike in South Africa, where the King's Committee Code, which is the Code of Corporate Governance for South Africa, has made it mandatory that combined assurance is a mandatory project for every, for some class of organizations, particularly the PLCs in South Africa. Okay, in Nigeria is an emerging thing. But looking at the mandates of risk management function, internal control, as prescribed by CAMA, Investment and Securities Act, National Code of Corporate Governance, and even the various sectorial codes, combined assurance, there is no option for combined assurance for companies in Nigeria, particularly those companies with complex operations, the PLCs and others. All right? So we know that one of the major problems, particularly in Nigeria anyway, and some other organizations, this doesn't happen in South Africa, because there is a regulatory enforcement, is that combined assurance is executive management and board initiative to trim down on controls. A large number of professionals in this first and second line of defense believe this, and as a result, there may be resistance to implement combined assurance in organizations. Why some others understand it, that look, is a transformation project to ensure that people are more productive in managing risks and also executing their work. That is a positive thing and not to make people to lose their jobs. Okay? So, harmonizing the reports on risk assurance that is coming from the different line of defense in the organization requires that combined assurance should be adopted in businesses. Okay? Now, what is another big problem in managing risks and complexities in Nigeria? In other climes, particularly US, and also UK and some other countries, there is regulatory requirements on the enterprise risk management framework. The PCAOB recommended COSO frameworks. In Australia, what they're using is ISO 31000. But in Nigeria, there is no regulatory requirement or pronouncement of any leading practices enterprise risk management framework to be adopted. What you see in most of the guidelines provided by the regulators in terms of risk management are the specific actions to be taken. But how the principles and again, the methodologies to be adopted in order to enable the businesses to benchmark what they're doing with respect to risk management against the target performance of the companies and also the regulators' expectation and leading practices is missing. So what you see here in Nigeria, particularly the banks, is that most banks are adopting COSO framework for their enterprise risk management. Okay, some are adopting a mix of COSO framework and ISO 31000. All right, so in your own organization, what has board approved for the risk management function to adopt, or for the organization to adopt in managing its risk? Okay, so it's a question. What do organizations, what should they be considering in adopting any risk management standard like COSO, ISO 31000, OSCE grade book, British Standard 31000, and FEMA? The things that organizations should actually be considering in adopting any framework is the nature of risks that happen in the industry, in the environment, and also experience of their industry, the laws and regulations, best practices, and the business needs. What you see that happens is that rather than organizations depending on their needs to adopt leading practices, enterprise risk management standard, you find out that is actually depending on the staff capabilities within the risk management function. But that shouldn't be so. Which means that internal audit, internal control function, compliance function, you should actually understand the risk management function that is applicable in your own environment. For example, for compliance, ISO, the standard. Organizations in Nigeria, of course, the CBN has clearly indicated and also said that internal audit functions in the organizations should adopt Institute of Internal Auditors standard, okay, for managing the internal audit function. But how about managing the risks, conducting risk assessment, designing internal controls, and monitoring the controls? Which framework should be adopted? IIA is only for auditing risk and controls, and not the standard for risk assessment and for managing risks or monitoring risks. So what standards have we adopted in our various businesses with respect to risk assessment, risk management, and risk analysis? Okay. Hello, Ngozi, I still see my screen? I can't see my screen again. Wow, what happened?
No, it has gone off.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So
everybody, immediately all the people we hope In fact, when Innocent told me, blah, 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 that to you, that she,
I
hopped on it.
can't share my screen again. Why? Hello, Ngozi? Hello?
Hello, ma'am.
I can't share my screen. What is
your
that?
screen. We can see your slide.
Yes. You're saying it? Okay,
yes,
so continue. I'm not, okay. Hold on. Wow, I don't even know where. I can't see my screen again. Yeah. Are you still seeing the screen?
No, mine has gone off.
Okay. Okay, has it come up now?
Yes, it has.
Okay. Hold on, I want to put it in. Wow, I want to put it in presentation mode. What is happening? Please forgive me. I think I'm struggling with my system. Okay, this was where I was, right? Okay. All right, so it is very, very important for the board, the executive leadership, to ensure that their companies adopt a leading practices enterprise risk management framework for the organizations. And that should actually be contained in the enterprise risk management framework that has been developed for the organization. Okay. So the next area of challenge is, I've mentioned risk rating, probability rating, impact rating, control effectiveness rating, that different organizations, they adopt different nomenclatures and different rating skills when it comes to rating risk impact, rating the likelihood of risks, and also rating the control effectiveness. Okay? So what is applicable in most organizations is 3 parameters rating, which is low, moderate, high, in rating the impact. The same thing applies in rating the likelihood or probability. The same thing also applies in rating control effectiveness. But some organizations have also are also using numeric metrics, maybe 3x3 metrics or 5x5 metrics, which has to do with 1, 2, 3, 5x5 metrics, but in descriptive form rather than in numeric form. For example, describing the impact of risk, you have insignificant, minor, moderate, major, catastrophic, why likelihood. They use rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain. And in control effectiveness, they can use unsatisfactory, weak, good, satisfactory, very good. All these rating skills, they are good. Either the 3 low, moderate, high is also good. But the major problem in using descriptive or in rating our risk components is that it tends to present vague results. For anyone to just look at the risk report or risk assurance report or risk status monitoring report, to just look at it and understand what it represents. What it means is that there have to be other additional documents that have descriptions and the assumptions behind the various descriptive rating. The executive teams and also the governance teams, they don't have time to start shuffling from one document to the other to understand the presentations that is submitted to them, either by internal audit or risk management function or internal control or any other arm in the business. So what is the best practices recommendation is what is called 100 basis point. This 100 basis point, because percentage express, anything you express in percentage appear to be universally and commonly understood and interpretable. So the best practices recommendation is to use, instead of using just the descriptive and X by Y metrics to rate your risk, to present your risk reporting, internal control reporting, audit reporting in terms of rating the controls and risks. The 100 basis point is better. And why is it better? Okay. The heat map we have seen here is very common in most organizations in reporting risks and controls. Okay. But the 100 basis point, if you see what is displayed on the screen in a tabular form, the 100 basis points appear to empower the reader of the risk reporting information, either from internal control perspective or from internal audit perspective or from risk management perspective or from compliance perspective or from any other risk reporting function in the business. If you look at the tabular presentation on the screen, looking at it, that the items are expressed in percentage appears to be more, gives more meaning and quick interpretation to the report, because the risk impact is presented in percentage and the company objective area that the impact has affected is also presented. The likelihood of that risk occurring is also presented in percentage. The inherent risk, which is the severity of the risk impact, which in this case is the risk impact multiplied by probability, is also presented in percentage. The current control effectiveness, which is the controls that you have established, the level of effectiveness in addressing the risks, either the likelihood of the risk occurring or the impact of the risk occurring, or the aggregation, or which is the inherent risk, is also presented in percentage. The target control effectiveness, that is, how do you, if the current control is not working as you expect, how do you want it? What level do you want this control to work, which is target control effectiveness, is also presented in percentage. The residual risk, which is the risk remaining after controls have been established and working, is also presented in percentage. The target residual risk, which is how effective you want this control, any control you have, to reduce the risk. This is where you start talking about the risk appetite and the risk tolerance level, is also presented in percentage. So if you have the 100 basis points in rating the risk impact, in rating the probability of risk occurring, in rating the control effectiveness, both current and target. And in rating the residual risk, both current and target, it provides more power on what decisions the user of the risk information can take and actions that can be recommended in a jiffy. And also it lets us to know the variation of the residual risk from the risk appetite and also the risk tolerance level, which the descriptive style of risk rating and risk reporting will not provide for you. So 100 basis points is the new trend in risk management, okay? Now we know that this 100 basis points, a lot of work need to go in order to arrive at this 100 basis point reporting. And this is what the risk control self-assessment model is also recommended, which means how organizations find their risk is important. What is the level of involvement of the core business lines in identifying their risks? What is the level of engagement with the executive management team in identifying the risks in the business? And what is the level of involvement of the governance team, the board of directors, the members of the board and board committees in identifying the risk of the business? And even going beyond the organization, the regulators, and also the external consultants and auditors, the level of involving them in identifying the risks in a business. That is what risk control self-assessment is saying. And that is what the 100 basis point is saying, which means that full table, the business, the risk owners, the process owners, the control owners, the business leaderships, the governance team must be involved in conducting risk assessment. All right. So now, when we have a risk reporting, either from internal audit or compliance or internal control or operational risk or ERM or any of the risk management or risk coordination function in business is reporting, it is easy to report the risk and control status in graphical. So what we are saying in essence is that organizations should start thinking of going beyond using high, low, moderate, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 5 matrix to report their risk, to rate their risk. They should consider alternatives. And the best alternative in the market now is the 100 basis points. Okay? All right. So having all that we have been talking about are the challenges. The current challenges limiting effective risk management in our organizations. So how are you finding the risks and measuring the risks and ranking the risks in your various organizations? How are you doing that? In various risk governance, risk management, internal control, internal audit, compliance trainings, we have facilitated, particularly involving levels beyond the executive team. We always ask questions about the organization's corporate mission, core values, value proposition, goals and objective, and strategy. The responses we always get is not encouraging, except if they revisit their websites or their audited financial statements or documents containing these key elements in their business. And the question is, if we can't have the company vision, the mission, the core values, the value proposition, the goals and objectives, and even the corporate strategy, if we can't discuss it quickly at a glance without referring to any document, how are we giving confidence to the executive leadership and the board that we are best at managing the risks in the business? Which means that for organizations to find their risks, understanding the company vision, mission, core values, value proposition, goals and objectives, the corporate strategy, the leadership mindset, external factors, organizational needs, risk and control taxonomy, and risk appetite is critical. Having good understanding of this is very, very critical. If any of them is missed, nothing guarantees that the risk you're identifying is the risk impacting the business. It means the risk you are putting on the table is a guesswork. So this is a call to action by the senior managers that are represented here and lower level, that good understanding of your business, not just knowing how to conduct the business processes, but what the business stands for, the vision, the mission, the core values, the value proposition, the goals and objectives, the corporate strategy is very, very important. But we know that one of the greatest challenges to the risk management function at the second level, at the third level, is that when businesses are conducting their annual strategy sections, you find out there is only the executive directors, the board members, and some senior managers, the heads of risk management, the heads of internal audit, the heads of internal control, the heads of compliance are not represented in the annual corporate strategy sections. Why? This is a very big issue. If they are not represented, to hear from the voices mouth, to hear from the executive directors, to hear from the board, the different perspectives, the different questions, the different discussions that are going on in establishing the corporate strategy, in reviewing the corporate strategy, and also taking decisions on what is to be done, on the action to be. How do you expect the heads of risk management, the heads of internal control, the heads of internal audit, the heads of the second and third line of defense support you as executive directors, to support you as board members, to support you as board committee members on reporting on risks, on controlling the risks, and shouting their voices on risk? So the implication, which is best practices, is if you are going for corporate strategy sections, the head of risk management, internal audit, internal control should be there to hear from you their different perspectives, their different decisions, the different action plans regarding the corporate strategy, so that when they get back and they're now working with the business lines to coordinate risk management functions, to monitor the risks, to monitor the effectiveness of the controls, to conduct audits on the effectiveness of the controls, they will always remember the things that have been discussed and agreed, recommended in the strategy sections. Because just reading the strategy document is not enough. All right. So what I have here is the current practices, which I have already mentioned. Okay. Now, measuring the sizes of the risk, we've already mentioned them. That what you have is high, low, medium. But best practices wants, which I know that the board and the executives, they want to specific on a particular risk. What is the potential loss, potential financial loss on a particular area? The potential damage, for example, to critical assets. The potential loss of critical manpower in a particular area, or injury to human beings. So it's not just saying that this particular risk is high. I want it to be quantified, either in percentage or in absolute value, which is either in numbers, for example, number of assets that will be affected, or financial terms in naira, on dollars, whichever. It makes more meaning. Okay? So there are different methods of measuring, quantifying risk. You have the qualitative, which is the most popular in organizations. You have the quantitative, which is what we are preaching. But whichever one that is being used, involvement of the risk owners, involvement of the control owners, involvement of the process owners, involvement of the executive teams, executive management, and involvement of the board, and also talking to external parties like external auditor and regulator is, and also through research is very, very essential. Okay, and this is where tracking loss events and near misses in our organization is very important, whether it is for operational risk or for other risk types. Okay, for example, strategic risk, wrong decisions taken on the corporate strategy is a strategic risk. What is the cost of that wrong decision that was taken? What was the cost? Is it missed opportunities? What are those opportunities in financial terms? Okay, so that is that. Then, what are the top risks in a business? What you find out is that in most organizations, they may have 100 risks or even 1,000 in their risk registers. If they don't have risk registers, by the time you start going through their standard operating procedure documents, their strategy documents, the various management reports, various documents in the business, by the time you collate all the various risks, individual risks contained in those documents, it may be up to 100. It may be about 1,000. You find out that when internal audit is reporting, when internal control is reporting, when risk management is reporting, it's like they report on every aspect of the risk. But it shouldn't be so. What should be going to the executive management and the board are the critical risks. So the question is, how many of the risks are critical to you? I've also seen in an organization where they're reporting top 20 risks out of 100 risks. More than 1,000 risks in their risk register. But by the time you will look at the granularity of those top 20 risks, it's like they're reporting every risk in the business, which is the same thing as reporting everything in their risk register, which shouldn't be so. So looking at the global perspectives, the top 10 risks for year 2020 as revealed by Protiviti. Protiviti is a consulting firm that came out of Accenture, the old Accenture, okay? Then they have top 10 risks. The World Economic Forum also have top 10 risks. PricewaterhouseCoopers also have top 9 risks. Now the question is, these top 10 risks, as reported by these credible organizations, are they top 10 for your organization? And my honest answer is that they might not be top 10 for your organization. Why? It is top 10 globally, but each various business will have their own unique top 5 or top 10. Why? Because of the nature of the industry and because of the quality of the competence, risk management competence in the organization. And looking at the entire organization, the competence of the board, the competence of the executive leadership, the competence at the middle level, the competence at the lower level, and the competence of the assurance providers. That will actually tell you whether these top 10 in order of appearance are top 10 for your organization at any point in time. So it is expected that every organization must have at least top 5 key risks that keep the board and executives awake at night. Okay? So what it means is that the risk management function in the organizations, the second line, the third line, must know what is top in the board agenda, top in the executive team agenda. It is only when you know them that whatever assurance you are providing, whatever risk coordination you are providing, whatever risk monitoring you are providing, you will be able to add value. Okay? So how about risk communication? How are you communicating risks in your organization? The senior managers represented here and below, how are you communicating risks, controls to the executive board, to the executives, and to the board and the board committees? How about the other functions, other stakeholders in the business and outside the business that need the communication? Understanding what each level needs or stakeholder needs is very, very important. Are we engaging them enough? Are we engaging the executive team enough? Are we engaging the board enough to understand their needs, their reporting needs, their risk reporting needs. Are we doing that? There are various ways you can get what to report, the priorities of what to report, not just engaging the board and executives and other stakeholders in discussions, in brainstorming and the rest of them. There are other various reports in the business that you can have access to understand what is in the minds in terms of the top agenda for the executives and the governance team. The minutes of meetings is one of them. The various management and board reports are included. Various global surveys, research databases of leading practices to ensure that the knowledge and the experience that your board and executives are getting from you is not just what is limited to your business, but innovations and creativity of what is happening outside your industry, outside your organization, outside your country, outside wherever you're currently operating from. If you go to the internet, I'm talking to the senior managers and below levels represented here. The internet has lots of materials on risk management and communication. PwC has global surveys it does every year on risks. The same thing applies to KPMG, E&Y, Protiviti, World Economic Forum, and so many others. Do we have access to those information that are free of charge? Then the board and the executives. You also have roles to make sure that the senior management that you are depending on to provide you credible risk information about your business, that they continue to get the right knowledge skills. You also have responsibilities to be also conducting research at your free hours. I know some board executives, some board director members, some executives that have subscribed to leading practices databases, getting information about risks, compliance. And when they get such, they disseminate to their other assurance teams in the business, just to make sure that they are also getting well informed about this, and you're also supporting them. Training is very essential, but what is the quality of training that the management officers, the risk coordinators, and the risk assurance providers in your business, what is the quality of training they're attending? Is it just limited to the professional trainings that they attend in order to complete CPE hours? Those type of training, which is conferences, maybe one day, is that enough? Practical training, quality practical trainings. The board, the executive leadership, the board committees, you can recommend trainings for your subordinates, which is also beyond what is in the training plan, because there are some trainings on emerging trends that may come up that are not contained in the annual training plan that you can recommend to them. I want to use Platinum Edge as an example. Most times when we organize training on a risk assessment or risk readiness assessment or risk-based internal auditing, most of the nominations we get are coming direct from board audit committee members. They are sending the flyers to their internal auditors. They are sending the flyer, communicating the flyers to the executives. They are communicating the flyers to the heads of the assurance function in the 3 line of defense. And when they get such flyers, for example, what it means is that you expect them to take proactive action to get their skills upgraded. So how are we supporting the senior managers to upgrade their skills? Because it's only when they upgrade their skills in the right areas beyond the core business functions that they will be able to support you. Okay? So communicating risks. The senior managers, I'm talking to you now. Communicating risk and control information to the executives, to the board and board committees. The expectation is that the focus should be on key critical risks, critical, non-critical risks, and also the emerging risks. And whatever recommendations you are providing must be SMART, capital S, capital M, capital A, capital R, capital T. Not just unrealistic, unactionable recommendations, no. Remember that the risk management function, the risk coordination function, the risk assurance function from the first, second line, and third line of defense, there are 3 things you are expected to achieve. 1 is providing objective assurance, which means unbiased assurance, which means that your opinion on a particular risk and control must be solidified with facts, not assumptions. So if you are saying that this risk is high from your nomenclature, or moderate from your nomenclature, or low from your nomenclature, or catastrophic in terms of impact, or rare in terms of likelihood, or control if satisfactory in terms of control. What are the facts supporting those opinions? There must be facts supporting those opinions. That is what unbiased opinion is. You must also be providing objective advice, which means that the recommendations you are giving must be specific, achievable, realistic, measurable, and time-bound. And this is where key performance indicators come in. If your reports are short of SMART, you don't need to communicate them. Because the whole essence of risk and control reporting is for 1, to provide insight to the readers of the report about the performance in your organization and how risk and control management efforts, activities, actions in your organization are supporting the business in dealing with complexities and those risks. That's insight. The other one is objective advice. Your advice. Are they based on your capabilities? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't just be on what you can do. What it means is that before you recommend any action plan to the board, to the executive, or to any other stakeholder in the organization, you you have the responsibility to also research about those recommendations, about what happens, how it has been applied in other environments, in other industries, before you give such recommendation. And when you give a recommendation, the value it brings should also be included. Not value in descriptive form, but value in quantification form, which means the issue, you identify the issue. How about the root cause? The root cause of the issue is mandatory. Root cause analysis. Because if you don't understand the root cause of any issue, of any risk, providing recommendation will not work. Because recommendations should actually be working on the root cause rather than the symptom. And that brings us to the question on why is it that in spite of the level of risk management effort, the senior managers, the assurance providers, the risk coordinators are expanding in the business, the big issues continue to repeat. Why? And it is a very big concern to the CEOs, to the executive directors, to the board of directors and board committees. Because what I keep hearing in my engagement, in our engagement with the CEOs, with the executive directors of board, with board committee members, is that the big issues continue to happen. The cost of assurance is high because the big issues continue to repeat. Because new issues, when they emerge, by the time the organization realizes that, it would have had a catastrophic impact on the organization. So this makes the board, the executive teams, to feel that their assurance effort, internal audit effort, internal control effort, risk management effort, compliance effort is below standard. And that is the reason why it is difficult to provide one source of truth in the organization of assurance report. Okay? So how much assurance comfort do you require? The CEOs that are represented here. How much assurance comfort do you require? And how much are you getting from the 3 lines of defense? We know that there are 3 sources of assurance in every business. The first line, which is management assurance, which is the various reviews that are done by the ESCOs, the various discussions, reviews, discussions that are held by interdepartmental meetings and various subcommittees are the first line of, These are called management assurance. Then the second line, the various monitoring that are performed by internal control, health and safety, they are called semi-independent assurance because management is directly responsible for these functions, except in banks where the CBN regulation specify expressly that the risk management function and internal control report to independent assurance function, which is the third line of defense, internal audit, when it comes to internal, external auditors, and also external consultants. These are the various levels that the board, the executive, the board of directors, and the committees, and even the regulators get assurance from, assurance comfort. So we've already discussed the current assurance levels, efforts in the organization. But globally, there are 4 levels of assurance comfort that can be provided. One is adequate assurance. You can call the top level or highest assurance that is required. The other one is inadequate assurance, which means that assurance is being provided, but is not sufficiently meeting the board's and the executive management needs. Adequate means that, look, the board and the executive are comfortable, they have confidence and trust about the risk management and control practices in the organization. Inadequate assurance means that there are significant gaps. Overassurance means that this is where you have issue, very big issue of assurance. And the only way I can express overassurance, because some we say that they want overassurance, but overassurance is not good. Overassurance is saying that, look, if you compare the criticality of a risk, for example, and the effort expended by the first line, the second line, or the third line in monitoring the controls around that risk is not commensurate with the benefits. This is where you have overassurance. And that is what is happening in over 90% of companies around the globe, including Nigeria. And this happens where internal audit is testing all controls whenever they go for the internal audit work. And this happens where internal audits make sure that they audit all risks in the risk register at a particular year. And this happens when internal control is monitoring all risks in the business, which means that there is no discretion on the risk to focus attention on. That is where overassurance comes in, and that is common. So unless overassurance is eliminated, the cost of managing risk, the cost of providing assurance over risk will be too high, will continue to be too high. And this is where combined assurance comes into play, because combined assurance will ensure that adequate assurance is provided at any level. What it means is that the risk register, first of all, must be at the quality it is required in the business. What it means is that if you have 100 risks, internal audit, there could be a allocation that internal audit should focus on monitoring the top 10 critical risks that keep the board leadership and executive management awake at night. And mind you, the internal audit only does periodic audit. Internal control can focus on, because the internal control does continuous control monitoring, they can focus on certain aspects of the risk. Why at the business level, you are monitoring all risks in the course of initiating transaction, which means that self-review, taking responsibility for the risks and controls in your business area, when you are initiating transaction, when you are approving transaction, when you are initiating any document, when you are taking any decision regarding any this thing, it must be taken care of, nipped at the bud first by the people that are responsible for those transactions, for those process activities. It is only when this is done before adequate assurance can be provided at the right level. Okay, now no assurance. Okay, so I've already explained the new model of assurance allocation when we were talking about the challenges and the limitations. Okay, so the question is, in your own organization, is the current situation the same? Is this similar in your organization? And I will if we are voting or asking people to respond, I can imagine that over 90% of people represented here will say yes, this is similar in the organization, if not 100%. The same thing for the targets or the expectations. I'm sure quite a lot will agree. However, I know that in a large number of organizations that we have helped to develop risk management framework, to revamp their internal audit function, to establish internal control function. We have always presented this and agreed that they will do. For example, the first line, they will say, okay, can they start with 50% rather than 90%? Or can we start with 30% and progress? We give ourselves targets. The first 6 months, we'll be able to achieve 30%. Within 1 year, we'll be able to achieve 90%. Because there has to be a learning curve, since it's not something that we are doing before. Within the next 2 years, we should be able to achieve 8%. That's what most organizations we have worked for have agreed. Okay, so but for internal audit and internal control, for them to have more responsibility assurance on the risks and controls, maybe 10% or 20% or 30%. I don't think that for them to be targeting that means that they will lose focus on the critical risks. All right. So I've already explained combined assurance. I don't need to go in. Now, this is application of combined assurance. How do we apply combined assurance in our risk management? Because these are new trends. First is that risk management, building the risk register, corporate risk register is mandatory. A centralized corporate risk register, which means a centralized enterprise risk management register, not operational risk register, not strategic risk register, not regulatory requirement register, no, or financial risk register. We are saying that, look, the entire risks, whether it is operational, whether it is strategic, whether it is regulatory, whether it is financial, a project, looking at them as a single project and building a risk register is better than siloed approach of building a risk register. Because if you adopt siloed approach, what it means is that the interrelationships, the interfaces of the various risks at various categories, the potential impacts and effects on other operations and risks will not be known. So building an enterprise corporate risk register should be the target. Okay, should be the target. That means that if you have individual risk registers for each of the 4 categories, strategic risk, corporate financial reporting, operational risk, because financial reporting risk is actually operational risk. Then financial risk, which applies mainly to the banks. Okay? Then the compliance risk, if you have the risk registers that have been built by the various functions, what it means is there has to be a project to look at all those risk registers and see how they can be consolidated. Consolidating them means that engaging the board, engaging the executive leadership, engaging the various entities and heads of departments and even operational level staff, external relationships we have, engaging them is critical in order to consolidate the various risk registers into the centralized corporate risk register. And it should come from the effort of the executive of the business line management, which means top down, a combination of top down and bottom up approach. But you find out that what happens now is bottom up approach. When risk assessment is being conducted in the organization,
Sally. Good afternoon.
Hello,
good afternoon, Sally. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think we need to round up now.
Yes, just give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Our time.
10 minutes, okay.
Thank you.
10 minutes.
5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay, you find out that what is and what happens now is bottom up approach rather than top down and bottom up. You have to start from top to engage the board, the executives, to find out what is keeping them awake at night, their needs, the business needs and their targets. Then you will now start interviewing, engaging the lower level, which is the various heads of departments, the operational staff, to even understand how their own understanding of risk is integrating with the perceptions and perspectives of the board and the executive leadership, okay? So that risk register is very, very important. That's what is represented here, which means that planning the work of the assurance providers, the first, second, third line, the risk register must be driving it and also reporting to the board. All right, so now the last thing is your risk management framework or your risk management efforts or your risk internal control systems, your risk management systems, your assurance systems, which means internal audit, internal control, risk management, and the rest of them. How are you monitoring them to ensure that is, I'm asking this question to the board and the executives management. How are you monitoring them, evaluating their performance to ensure that they are meeting the mandates as established in their various charters? Okay, so this is called enterprise risk management capability assessment model. So when you are evaluating, of course, I don't expect you to do that by yourself. It's through external consultants. But the various functions should also know how to do it by themselves through self-quality assessment. The key elements that are evaluated or appraised is how that function, risk management function, the strategy of risk management function, or internal audit function, or internal control function, or risk operational risk function, how the strategy in managing risk is aligning with the overall corporate strategy. How about the oversight structure, oversight function? Reporting, in terms of reporting to the board, committees, technically, and also reporting to the executives. How about the systems in terms of the IT facilities, the tools and techniques, and the frameworks they are using? How savvy are they? Then style, what is the style? The style has to do with relationship management, reporting, engagement, quality of report, quality of interaction. Are they being regarded as police? I'm talking about the assurance function now and risk management function. Are they being regarded as police in the business or business partners and collaborators? A large number of organizations, internal auditors, internal control officers, risk management officers or risk coordinators, compliance officers, the auditees regard them as police officers. They shouldn't be. They should actually be business partners. How about staffing in terms of availability? Although it is the overall responsibility of the executives and the board to ensure that the business functions under them get adequate in terms of number of resources. But these functions, what are you doing to make sure that you discover areas of improvement? Because it is the level of value you are adding that will actually build a business case for the board and the executives to help from outside. Then the skills, competence, okay? Now, competence, we know is a very big issue in Nigeria now, but what effort are we making to make sure that we build that? Okay, so what I have here, which is the last slide, is the various risk management capability maturity assessment levels. You have level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. That's another perspective. But we know that any organization that has started business and running, they can never be in level 0 in terms of risk management. The least could be level 1. Okay, but this model, which is Institute of Insurance Risk Management and Insurance Managers, believe that, look, there should be level 0 to level 5. Another school of thought also believe that, look, the least is level 1 and the highest is level 5. And level 1 is emerging. Level 2 is progressing, while the last level is aspirational. Another school of thought has level 1 to level 4, while level 1 is preliminary. Okay, so but the key thing is that there are various parameters, over 27 parameters, that organizations can match themselves to be able to know whether they're in level 1 or level 2 or level 0 or the highest level, which is aspirational level. But whichever, it is important that the quality of effectiveness of the risk management function, internal audit function, internal control function, compliance function should be assessed, just like the board does its own quality assessment of the corporate governance through corporate governance benchmarking, corporate governance board assessment or director's assessment, and also appraiser of the executive team. So the auditors, the assurance providers within the risk management function. Okay, so that is all from me. Thank you. Hello? Hello?
Hello, we are here. Thank you very much.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Let's give her a round of applause.
I can't hear it, oh. I can't hear the applause. All right, so I don't know how many people that are still connected, but if they have, anybody has question, I'm available to respond.
Fantastic presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sally. We'll
Okay.
take questions from the participants if there are questions.
All right. Okay. I'm all ears.
Well, can I start off since nobody's
Yes.
saying?
Yes, sir, you can.
Okay, my name is Dr. Mohammed Chanturaki.
Okay.
Let me congratulate the presenter again. I mean, it's a very detailed presentation, and I believe that it's a presentation that can be useful at all the levels that she discussed, level 1, 2, 3. My first request is that I hope that you will oblige us with the slides of the presentation.
Yes.
And my second request is that we would also like to have your contact details.
Okay, sir.
So that if we have issues in organization, we can ask you to come and speak to our either the board committee members or even the whole board.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. One of the questions I have is that you spoke very much both regarding the risk management function and the audit function.
Yeah.
In most institutions, there are overlaps, and people feel that there are overlaps
Yeah.
in these two functions.
Yeah.
But I believe that they're actually different. And for me, actually, it's better to have overlap than even to have gaps. But if you can talk through, because some of the board risk committee chairmen, sometimes they feel that usually there's repetition between what risk management is doing and also what audit is doing. So it's important that these two functions are actually quite separate.
Okay.
Unfortunately, in some of the smaller corporates, the role of both the risk management committee, sometimes the audit committee also handles the risk management aspect of the business. So you will have audit and risk management board committee.
Okay.
I need to have your comment. Do you think that is it good practice to have both the same board committee overseeing both, oversighting both? And the second clarification I also want is to, if it is possible to actually itemize and differentiate between the roles of the audit function in an organization and also vis-a-vis the risk management function in an organization.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, sir. Okay, first is that you will get the slides. Normally, I've already sent the slides to Society of Corporate Governance, but what I told them is not to share it yet, because normally when we finish a forum like this, the questions you have asked, the contribution you have made, it's important that I incorporate them to update them on the slide before forwarding to you, but that will be sent to them before close of business tomorrow. Yes. Then the other question you asked regarding the boundary between the overlap between internal audit and risk management function, and also the board audit committee, and board risk management committee. I want to say that for us to, first of all, to understand what risk management department or functions should do is risk management department. The members should, first of all, should not be called risk managers. They should be called risk coordinators. That is where we will start the understanding from. They are not risk managers. The risk managers are the core business. the executive directors, the core business line, the process owners, the risk owners and control owners, the core business lines, and maybe the other supporting function. Risk department is a risk coordinator. The same thing applies to internal control. The internal control is a risk coordinator, but from internal control perspective, what do we mean? The work of the risk management department is to make sure that they provide guidance to the business lines for the business lines to find the risks in their operations. They are to provide guidance and not to find the risks. Risk department, their responsibility is not to find the risk, but guidance in terms of what template do we use for documenting our risk register. Risk department can come up with a template, not a final template, but idea of a template, and they will now discuss it with the business line. If it is sufficient, they can bring their idea and the template will be provided. Now, how do we classify our risk? There has to be risk classification. Give us examples of risk classification. Okay, what framework are we going to use? The risk management department, the risk department should actually tell the business line that we can use COSO. And we can train you on how to use COSO to identify the risks, to design controls. But to identify the risk, quantify the sizes of the risk, rank the risk sizes, and prioritize and determine the risk responses and the actions to mitigate those risks, which are controls. It is not the responsibility of risk department. It is the responsibility of the business lines. So the risk department are risk coordinators. Now, how about reporting risk? Yes, they can report the risks. For reporting the risk, it means that they need to talk to the various risk owners, the various business lines. Now, internal control, their responsibility is to work with management to design control, but it's not their function to design controls. It is for them to provide guidance to the control owners, to the risk owners, to the process owners on how to design controls. For example, what is the definition of a control? But they are not to design the control by themselves. It's the owners at the first line should design that. Okay, now, when it comes to assurance, the work that the internal control is performing, they're also monitoring on how the business is performing in the controls that have been established. The risk management is also monitoring. How are they monitoring? How they are monitoring is to make sure that reporting risk to the business, that they get reports from internal control, they get reports from the business lines, they also get reports from internal audit, they get reports from assurance, and provide whatever risk report that is required at their level. Now, internal audit. Internal audits, they are not monitoring control on a regular basis. It's on periodic basis, maybe on monthly. Now, what do we do? What do we say by monitoring controls? What it means is that they are testing the controls around a risk or particular risks. And the CAMA, if it is PLCs, public limited, public companies, CAMA has mandated audit committee to be responsible for internal audit. I know that they are responsible for external auditors. But in terms of risk assessment, risk identification, risk measurement, if it is a PLC, the audit committee, for example, can also perform the role of risk management committee, except they are mandated to be a separate committee, like the banks, the CBN mandates that audit committee should be different from board risk committee. But outside the bank, the same committee can provide that. But providing that requires that the internal audit should not be involved in building the risk register, that is conducting risk assessment and designing controls, because the board committee is expected to be independent of whatever the business transaction is doing. So is internal audit should be. So yes, the board audit committee can perform the role of risk management board, providing oversight on risk management function, just like board, except where it is mandatory, like the banks, that it should be separate for board risk committee to be separate, and audit committee to be separate. But if it is not, board committee can perform that role, but they must make sure that internal audit is not involved in conducting risk assessment, in designing controls in the business. That is the only way their independence can be assured. But somebody will ask, how about if we don't have risk register? Can internal audit do their work? Yes. If we don't have risk register already, we don't have risk identified, how can internal audit, will internal audit stay idle until risk register has been identified? No. Internal audit can go on their work. How can they do that? They can act as risk coordinator by talking, using what we mean by quick wins, to talk to the executive directors, to the board members, to the head of department, to understand their risks. So in this case, it's the executive director that are telling them, these are my risks, and this is how I see them in terms of size. The board is also telling them. The business owners are also telling them. They will document. When they get back, they will document it and now bring it back.
Thank you so
the
much.
executive director that, look, this is what came out from our interview. Does this represent what you have told us? Yes, sign.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you so much. We sincerely need to end this session. Thank you so much. What we'll do is we're going to share your details with all attendees of this member session, and I'm sure we can continue the conversation outside this, but we really need to, we had planned just for 2 hours, and this is 30 minutes far gone. But I would like to say a very, very big thank you to you on behalf of members. Yes, please.
Okay, so the doctor that asked the question, I want his details so that we can continue the discussion from the list.
Yes, we are going to share it. We are going to share it with him.
All right.
So share. Thank you so much on behalf of the members and also the board of directors of the society, and we here at management would like to say a very big thank you for this session, and you have really done a great job, quite insightful, We've seen a lot of chats asking for the PowerPoint presentation as well as the recording. So as you have said, we'll wait for you to update and you share with us, then we can also forward to members.
Okay.
So I'd like to thank our members for staying. I know that the session was quite informative and interesting. Hence, we still have a lot of people on the call. We have just 2 announcements to say that please save the date, October 18th, for our conference, our 2022 Annual Corporate Governance Conference, October 18th. Tuesday is going to be a hybrid event, but we'll share further information as we proceed. Information about the speakers, information about registration and all that. Another save the date I would like us to save is for our induction, President's Dinner and Induction Program, November 18th. Pauline, just to scroll down, just to confirm the date exactly.
Okay.
November the 17th. Yes, it's November the 17th. We are going to have the AGM. We'll have our AGM. We'll have the President's Dinner and the membership induction, both corporate, individual, and also fellowship appointment of the society. So on behalf of my team and the board, I would like to say a very big thank you to everybody that has joined. From the team, you will see that this is just the first series, right? The first topic in that series. So we are going to have another, hopefully before the conference or perhaps after the conference, but we'll communicate with members as we finalize plans for the next edition of this series. So thank you so much for your time and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye.
Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you.
All right, okay, so I will update the slide with the last question.